when the darkness retreated and the obelisk crumbled into black dust, Alexei felt reality around him begin to change. The air became lighter, but at the same time, there was a sense of unease, as if something important was still unfinished. Shevchenko checked his ammunition and grimly said, "I don't like how this looks." It was too easy, and indeed, though the battle had been tough, something about it felt off. The dark entity they had spoken to earlier had disappeared without a trace. There were no cries of defeat, no chaos, or sense of finality. "This isn't over yet," Alexei said, surveying the ruins. "We destroyed their obelisk, but is it truly the source of their power?" Then they heard sound. It resembled an echo of voices coming from somewhere deep within the ruins, as if the very space was groaning in pain. "It's not the obelisk. It was merely a sacrifice," said a soldier from their team. Timur, his voice hoarse. "They've given up their power for something greater." The ground beneath their feet trembled and suddenly cracked open, revealing a massive chasm that led to an even deeper level of darkness. Something else was emerging from within. It wasn't just darkness. It was a new horror, born from the remnants of the destroyed power. Shevchenko grabbed Alexei by the arm. "We need to retreat while there's still time." But it was too late. From the darkness, new creatures began to crawl out. They no longer resembled the beings they had faced before. These were pure shadows with no shape or face, but their voices echoed with thousands of whispers, each one pleading, screaming, threatening, and seducing at the same time. "You cannot stop us," they whispered. "You are merely a part of the cycle." "Fire!" Alexei shouted, raising his rifle. Shots rang out in the darkness, but the bullets simply passed through the creatures without causing any harm. The darkness consumed matter itself, as if it lived by a different set of physical laws. That's when Alexei understood. They're not enemies. They're echoes. They can't kill us, but they can make us believe we're already dead. His words cut through the void like rays of light. The team stopped. They couldn't fight with weapons, but could resist with sheer willpower. "Move forward," Alexei commanded. Every step into the darkness was a trial. Their fears became tangible. They saw ghosts of their past, heard the voices of fallen comrades. But they pushed forward, knowing it was all an illusion, a trap for the weak. And then, they saw her. At the very center of the chasm, amidst chaos and destruction, stood a figure. It was her, the entity they had spoken earlier. But now, she was different. Her form had shifted. She was taller, stronger, and the darkness around her seemed to pulse. "You still think this is a battle?" she said. "No, this is merely preparation. Are you ready to witness the true end?" And the world trembled once more. The world trembled, and darkness swirled around them like a hurricane. The figure at the center of the chasm spread its arms, and the space around it began to distort, transforming into something unreal. Alexei felt his body grow heavy, as if he were being pulled into the very darkness. The voices in his head grew louder, forcing him to doubt every decision. What if it's true? A whisper echoed directly in his ear. What if you never won? What if everything you've seen is just an illusion? He shook his head, gripping his rifle tightly. No, that can't be true. But the other members of the team were already wavering. Shevchenko, always calm and resolute, suddenly lowered his weapon and whispered, "I can see them. They're there. Everyone we've lost." Timur clutched his head with his hands, trying to silence the voices. "It's not true. They're dead. I saw them die." Alexei realized that this was their true enemy. Not the darkness, not the monsters, but the doubts consuming their minds. "Don't listen to them," he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "It's a lie. They're trying to make us give up." He raised his rifle and fired into the air. The sound broke the silence, and for a moment, the voices in his head went silent. The team snapped out of it. Either we fight, or they take us. The choice is yours. Shevchenko took a deep breath and raised his weapon. His eyes cleared. "We've come this far. I'm not stopping now." Timur also regained his composure and stood beside him. "Damn it, I'm not dying listening to this nonsense." The dark entity watched them with a curious smile. "Do you really think your will can change anything?" Its voice was calm, almost soothing. "You are just grains of sand in an endless cycle. Every step you've taken was foreseen. You are heading the wrong way. Alexei looked straight into its eyes. Then tell me, where should we go? The entity stepped forward. Now it was very close. Its face had no defined features. It seemed to shift, reflecting different forms. Lost friends and enemies they had killed. Face your true enemy, it whispered, and the world exploded in white light. When Alexei came to, he was lying in an unknown place. It was neither darkness nor the battlefield, but something else. A smooth black surface stretched endlessly in every direction. Overhead, there was no sky, only infinite emptiness. His team was there too, but they were motionless. They seemed frozen in time, their eyes open but unresponsive. What is this place? He whispered, and then he heard a voice. You finally arrived. Standing before him was another figure, but this time it was entirely different. It looked familiar. Alexei felt a chill run down his spine as he realized who he was looking at. He was staring at himself, his own reflection, but older, with tired eyes and scars he didn't yet have. Are you ready to learn the truth? Alexei stood, staring at his reflection. The man before him was older, his face weary, but there was a fire in his eyes. Not fear, not anger, but something else. Who are you? Alexei gripped his rifle, ready for anything. You know who I am, the double replied, tilting his head. I am you, the one you will become, or have already become. His voice was calm, yet it carried a deep fatigue. What is this place? Alexei glanced around at the emptiness. His comrades, Shevchenko and Timer, seemed frozen in time. They neither moved nor breathed. The world felt unreal. This is not a place. It's a moment. A moment. The double nodded. You stand on the threshold of a choice that will change everything. I know because I've already made that choice. Alexei tensed. What choice? His reflection took a step closer. The world you know is just one version of reality. You fought, struggled, destroyed enemies, but you never asked why. What lies behind these battles? Why does this conflict never end? Alexei clenched his fists. I know what we fight for. To stop them. And who are they? Alexei opened his mouth, but hesitated. Who were they? Those behind the obelisk? The dark entities? Or someone else? You don't know, the double said quietly. Because you were never meant to know. The space around them began to shift. The black surface beneath their feet cracked, and suddenly Alexei saw a battlefield, but not the one he remembered. This was a different moment in time. He saw himself, younger, before it all began. He saw his unit entering the dark zone where they first encountered the enemy. He saw something else, a figure in the shadows, the same one that spoke to them in the ruins. It had been there from the very beginning. Now look closer, the double said, and Alexei saw what he had failed to notice before. He saw that they had fired the first shot. The first strike had been theirs. Do you understand now? The double's voice softened. The enemy you're searching for is yourselves. Alexei felt his mind shatter. No, that's a lie. It's the truth. You fought in this war for so long that you've forgotten how it began. You have become what you tried to stop, and now you have a choice. The world around them was crumbling. The double extended his hand. If you accept the truth, you can change it. If not, you will return, and everything will repeat again. Alexei looked around. Shevchenko and Timer were still motionless. What would he choose? Alexei looked at the outstretched hand of his double. His heart was pounding, and his thoughts were in turmoil. If he accepted the truth, what would come next? Shevchenko and Timer still stood motionless, as if frozen in time. The world around them was falling apart, while Alexei's reflection waited. He clenched his teeth. I can't believe this, he muttered. The double nodded. You don't need to believe. You need to see. Suddenly, the world around him changed. They stood on the battlefield where it all began. Alexei saw himself, younger, as he and his unit entered the dark zone. The figure in the shadows was there, watching, but now he saw something else. He saw the creatures they called enemies. They weren't attacking, they were defending. They were protecting something, someone. And he saw his unit fire the first shot. No, this can't be, he whispered. But it is, the double said. You're not a villain. You're just a soldier who didn't know the truth. And now you do. The question is, what will you do next? The world trembled again. I want to change it, Alexei said. The double smiled. Then it's time. Alexei felt his body begin to tremble. The world dissolved into light. He opened his eyes. He was back in the ruins, in front of the obelisk. But this time, everything was different. Shevchenko and Timer stood nearby, unsure of what had happened. "Are you okay?" Timer asked. Alexei was breathing heavily. He knew the truth. He knew they were part of the cycle. But now he had a choice. "We can't keep fighting this war," he said. Shevchenko looked at him in surprise. "What are you talking about?" Alexei looked at the sky. "I saw the truth. We weren't fighting enemies. We were fighting ourselves." Shevchenko remained silent. Timer glanced at the ruins. "And now what?" Alexei took a deep breath. "Now we have to end this cycle, once and for all." He lifted his rifle and dropped it to the ground. Shevchenko silently watched him. Then he did the same. Timer sighed and also threw down his weapon. The world shifted. The cycle was broken. The world had changed. After Alexei, Shevchenko, and Timer refused to keep fighting, something happened. The war, which had seemed endless, suddenly ceased. The battlefields fell silent. But this was not a victory. It was only the beginning of a new chapter. Alexei stood on a hill, watching as the sun slowly rose over the Deadlands. Once, these fields had been alive with battle, and now there was only silence. Behind him, Timer approached. "Do you think this is the end?" Alexei didn't answer immediately. He recalled what he had seen. The creatures they thought were enemies, the ruined cities, the vanished people. The truth was, they had never known what they were fighting for. "This isn't the end," he finally said. "This is a transition." Shevchenko stepped closer. "If the war is over, then why do I feel like we missed something?" Alexei met his gaze. "Because we don't know what comes next." And at that moment, they heard a sound, a distant rumble, like thunder before a storm. Shevchenko clenched his fists. "It's coming back." Timer swallowed hard. "Whatever it is, are we ready?" Alexei took a deep breath. "Now we know the world is more complex than we were told. If this is a new threat, we'll find out the truth before we shoot." He lifted his head and looked at the horizon. Something was approaching, and this time, they were ready to find out what it was. The rumble grew louder. The ground trembled faintly. Alexei, Shevchenko, and Timer stood motionless, staring into the fog that covered the horizon. They didn't know what was approaching, but they felt. It was something greater than the war they had left behind. "Do you think it's them?" Timer asked quietly. Alexei shook his head. "I don't know, but something has changed." Shevchenko was the first to grab the binoculars and lift them to his eyes. His face tensed. "It can't be." Timer snatched the binoculars from his friend's hands and looked for himself. His lips tightened into a thin line. "It's people." Alexei took the binoculars and finally saw what had shocked them so much. Across the blackened ashes that had once been a battlefield, an army was moving. But these were not the ones they had thought were enemies. These were their own people, exhausted, worn out, with torn flags and broken armored vehicles. "These are the survivors," Alexei whispered. Shevchenko glanced at him. "Do they not know the war is over?" Alexei sighed heavily. "Is it over at all?" At that moment, one of the soldiers on the other side raised a hand, signaling to them. "They've spotted us," Timer said, gripping his rifle. Alexei felt something tighten inside him. He had a choice, just like before, in front of the obelisk. But now, he knew. Every decision could change everything. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, raising his hands to show he wasn't going to shoot. Shevchenko and Timer exchanged glances but did the same. The soldiers on the other side stopped. The moment of truth had come. Alexei stood with his hands raised, gazing at the squad of soldiers approaching him. They were exhausted, burned, their faces coated in dust. Some were dragging injured comrades, while others could barely stay on their feet. The squad's commander, a burly man in a torn uniform, stopped a few steps away from Alexei. His eyes were dark and cold. "Who are you?" His voice was hoarse and tired, but it still carried steel. Alexei glanced at his comrades. "Soldiers, just like you." The commander narrowed his eyes. "Soldiers? If you're ours, why are you unarmed?" Shevchenko stepped forward. "Because we want to know the truth before we fight." A whisper ran through the ranks of the surviving soldiers. The commander stared at them for a few moments before signaling his men to lower their weapons. "You're not the first to say that," he finally said. Alexei tensed. "What does that mean?" The commander sighed heavily and turned to his men. The war isn't over, boys. It's just changed. Timer frowned. What's that supposed to mean? The commander ran a hand over his unshaven face and gestured toward the horizon. Come, if you really want to know what's going on, you need to see it for yourselves. Alexei, Shevchenko, and Timer exchanged glances. A new truth was unfolding before them. They moved forward, and what awaited them could change everything. The soldiers led Alexei, Shevchenko, and Timer across the desolate land. Their path wound between charred trees and the ruins of former fortifications. The air was thick with ash and echoes of the battle that had raged there. Finally, they reached the top of a high hill. The commander stopped and extended his hand forward. Look, Alexei raised his eyes and froze. Before him lay a massive military camp. But it wasn't just a camp. It was something more. On the horizon, towering machines loomed, resembling walking fortresses. Drones circled in the air like metallic predators. People below worked like ants, loading ammunition, repairing equipment, and preparing new units. Shevchenko cursed. Is that a new army? The commander grimaced. This isn't just an army. This is what came after us. Alexei felt a chill inside. After us. The commander nodded slowly. When we thought the war was over, they came. New commanders, new orders. They didn't ask if we wanted to continue. They just sent us here as expendable resources. Timer frowned. And who are they? Whose forces are these? The commander clenched his jaw. That's the big question. They call themselves the Last Legion. But they're not ours. They're not the ones we fought before. Alexei tightened his fists. Then who are they? The commander slowly turned his head toward him and quietly said, We don't know. A shiver ran down Alexei's spine. Down below, this new force was preparing for something. And the only question was, what exactly? Alexei stood on the edge of the hill, staring down at the camp of the Last Legion. Dozens of soldiers, massive war machines, reconnaissance drones. All of it spoke of a military power unlike anything they had seen before. The commander sighed heavily. They don't talk to us. They don't give explanations. They just appear, take whoever they deem necessary, and disappear into the unknown. Shevchenko narrowed his eyes. You're saying they're not ours. Then who are they? The commander frowned and gestured for them to follow. The only thing we've managed to learn is something even more terrifying than war. They moved down the hill, skirting the edge of the camp. Soon, they reached an old hangar standing apart from the main camp. The commander carefully opened the metal door and motioned for them to step inside. What they saw made their blood run cold. Soldiers lay on the floor, but their faces, they were disfigured, as if someone had tried to reshape them. Some had strange implants instead of eyes. Others bore scars resembling surgical procedures. What is this? Timer whispered. The commander clenched his fists. These are the ones who returned from their laboratories. The ones they fixed. Alexei leaned in closer. One of the soldiers was still alive. His eyes were blank, expressionless, but his lips twitched when he saw Alexei. They aren't human, he whispered faintly. Alexei felt his heart stop. Who? The soldier shuddered and rasped. The ones who hide behind masks, the ones who came after us, they aren't human. His breathing stopped. Silence filled the hangar. Shevchenko stepped back, stunned. You're telling me they aren't human? The commander slowly nodded. That's exactly what we're trying to figure out. But for now, we know one thing. The war isn't over. It's just beginning. And this time, we don't even know who we're fighting. Alexei clenched his teeth. An enemy without a face. An enemy they knew nothing about. And that enemy had already begun its work.